It was this morning about 4 o'clock. I heard my phone go off. So I get up to see what it is. It's Brad Forgy. He says, on July the 4th, 1976, at New Bethel, I preached on the freedoms of Christ. What are you preaching on today? And I told him, July freedoms. That's what I'm preaching on. So I want to begin by saying I love our country. And it's really hard if you've not been out of the country to appreciate what we have in this country. In the Declaration of Independence, God is mentioned 3 times. See if I can find them here. He's mentioned as God, as the Creator, and as a supreme judge. That document is a pretty long document. We don't see it when you find the Declaration of Independence up there. But there is a long list of gripes that the people in the United States, they were the colonies then, had concerning what the King of England had put on them and had done to them. And they stated, these are the reasons why we are withdrawing from the motherland, why we want our independence. Well, if you've not been out of the country, it's hard to really and truly appreciate it. I've been out of the country. My first experience was I went to Mexico with my parents in 1957. I was 12. And we went to El Paso and went just down into Mexico just to say we'd been out of the country. There's a funny story about that. I don't have time to tell you today. But anyway, the people down there were poor. The people didn't have jobs. They were just loitering around. And it was a very different experience because back then in the United States, guess what? People actually worked. And as many problems as we've got in this country, it still is the best country in the world. So I want to solicit your prayers this morning for our country. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, he says he wants supplications, that's begging. He wants prayers, or he wants God to seek judgment for that which is right and to ask for mercy. And he wants intercessions, that's going to God on behalf of someone else, giving God on others' behalf, praying for others. We got so many on our prayer list. Then he says, let it be made for all men, especially for those who are in authority, kings and rulers. I don't care whether you agree with the political stance of our president, senators, whatever. The Bible tells me and you to pray for them. I love the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. On one of my trips to Trinidad, our plane landed in Caracas, Venezuela. Well, I didn't get off the plane. But as the plane rolled up to the terminal, there were some men on the roof. And they set up a machine gun. And one picked up an automatic weapon. And the stewardess came on the loudspeaker and she said, don't be afraid. They're not after you. They're trying to keep their people from getting on this plane. What kind of a place is that to live? Where you have to put a machine gun on the people to keep them from leaving. You look at our borders with people coming across our borders from everywhere. And you need to understand, they are leaving what they had there in order to share in what you've got here. Now, I don't know what that says to you, but to me it says that what we've got here is so much more better and so much important, even when politically we have all kinds of disagreements. It's a time to talk about what our disagreements are. It's a time to lift up, and no better time than this year as we're getting ready for another big election. We don't have a national king or a dictator. A dictator is kind who would put a machine gun up on his people. A dictator is what Hitler was. And I had a cousin of mine to say not over 6 months ago, it's time for us to do away with the Constitution and all of the rights listed in the Bill of Rights. And I said, what do you mean, Jimmy? And he said, it's a dead document. And we have moved on from that. That is a political stance. And it's coming. And I say these words today only because I want you to know what's happening. And I want you to understand and appreciate what you got. At Springville, I had the 11th chapter of, or the 12th chapter, first 4 verses, that reflected back on the 11th chapter of Hebrews. And Hebrews 11 says, take a stand. Hebrews 12 says, and when you take a stand, look to Jesus, because He is the help that you have. Now let's get to something that's more appropriate to church. As much as I love those freedoms that we have in this country, and as much as I am fearful that they're about to be taken away from us, I know one thing. Spiritually, we are free. And the only way that will be taken away from us is if we turn our backs on it and leave it. We are free from the curse of the law. Paul alluded to this in the book of Romans. He said, when the law came, I died. He died spiritually, not physically. Paul was writing to him about how it had killed him. He didn't do what he should do. He did things he should not do. He said, how in the world am I going to get out of this curse? That's what he called it. When Jesus came, well, I should not have put that up there yet. When Jesus came and He talked about the curse of the fig tree, it died immediately. And that's what Paul was talking about. It'll kill you. Who shall deliver me from the body of this death, the law that brought death? Who's going to deliver me from that? I thank God through Jesus Christ. And then the 8th chapter starts, and you know what it says. There is therefore now no condemnation to them who are in Christ Jesus. And I want you to know, as you are free from the curse of the law this morning, you are also put in Christ. Because you are a Christian, you've obeyed the gospel. You will not be condemned if you continue to walk with Him. Secondly, this morning, we're free from the sacrifices of the law. Now, it's hard to talk about those because we've never done that. But number one, they were very expensive. Number two, it required a tenth. Number three, they did it multiple times through the year. There was one big sacrifice per year, but there were wave offerings and heave offerings and offerings for this and offerings for that, and they took a tenth of your income every year. But when Christ came, He made the sacrifice for us. The big sacrifice. So that now the only sacrifice He wants now is your heart. And if He's got your heart, He's got everything that you have, everything that you are, and everything that you ever will be. But if I don't give Him my heart, guess what? I can't give Him anything. There is nothing that He will accept. The sacrifices, we're free from those from the law. Then we're free from the restrictions of the law. All kinds of restrictions. You can't travel on the Sabbath day. If you go more than a mile, guess what? You can be stoned to death. And when Jesus comes, He's a Jew and He preaches on the mount, the Sermon on the Mount. If you're compelled to go 1 mile, go with Him 2. And He doesn't label it as, oh, by the way, don't do that on the Sabbath day now. Jesus says, you go on. I'm glad I'm bald. I wouldn't like the Jewish haircut. I can just tell you. And whether you're married or not, the Jews had to cut their hair a certain way. I'm glad I'm not Jewish. I did wear blue, and that's the requirement to the worship. But I don't have lace on the hem. And you got to have lace on the hem. There's a whole lot of those kinds of things we never even begin to think of. We are freed from that. You wear what you want to. You look like what you want to. Just bring your heart to the Lord. Free from all of those kinds of things, y'all. But those kinds of freedoms are only found in Christ. And I know I don't appreciate those enough. I know I don't have put those up. Lord, thank you for the freedoms you give us. I am so glad we live in this country, and I'm so glad we celebrate the 4th of July. But Lord, thank you for what we have in Jesus, those freedoms. Here's the biggie. We're free from sin. I did not say that you don't sin, you do. But we're free from the consequences of the sins we do. No, it's not that God doesn't hold you accountable. He does. But when I walk in the light, going back to Scott's class on Sunday morning, as He is in the light, if I'm doing what I need to be doing as a Christian, and I'm repentant of my sins, even though some sins I commit, I do not even know what they are. How can you repent of a sin you don't know? I say, Lord, forgive me from those things I don't realize are sins that I do. Lord, forgive me of all those wrongs that I've wronged you with, and help my heart to be changed so that I'm drawn closer to you. I'm going to use Romans chapter 6 today. I'm going to use specifically verses 17 through 18, but you need to know that the setup for Romans 6 is Romans 3. We all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Romans 3 says. The remedy to that is chapter 6. He says in verse 17, "But thanks be to God, you were the servants of sin. You became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching whereunto you were delivered." Now, verse 16 says, you were the servants of sin. It's important also to tie that together, because the word for servant there is slave. Slave. Sin has got you. You can't get away from it, and it makes you continue in it. And the only release from that is Jesus. But I want you to see how Jesus releases you here. You became obedient from the heart. So the heart is involved in me getting out of slavery. Do you see that? And the thing that you obeyed was a form. A form means that it's like something. You know, I got this form I got to fill out to get a job. There's certain things that go in the blanks, and I've got to conform to the form. Well, this is a type of teaching. And earlier in the chapter, he says, "For as many as you as were baptized, you were baptized into his" what? His death. You were buried with him in death. You were raised with him to walk in newness of life. Now I want you to look what it says. To that form that you obeyed. And unless you obey that form, listen to me, how can you obey the gospel? 1 Corinthians 15 says, this is what the gospel is: the death, the burial, and the resurrection. And unless you have submitted to that, you haven't obeyed the form. But the obedience from the heart of the form is what you were delivered by. Verse 17 says, "And being made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness." What was it that made you free from sin? Of course it's the blood of Jesus. Of course it's the forgiveness of your sins. But you were not delivered in that way until you obeyed from the heart that form. So if I've obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine, I've been made free from sin. Now don't miss this. What he's talking about is you are no longer a slave to sin. It does not hold you any longer. And I was talking to a fellow at Springville on the way out the door coming up here. He said, "Brother Charlie, I know what you're talking about from Hebrews chapter 12, being a follower of Jesus." He said, "I used to drink heavily. I was an alcoholic." I started to tell him, "You probably still are an alcoholic. You're just not doing it anymore." But he said, "I quit that with Jesus' help. I don't do that anymore. I'm free. I don't have to do that anymore. And this morning, Brother Charlie, I don't even want to do that anymore." There's the freedom. The freedom that Jesus gives. So when you were delivered from sin, something happened to you. You became a new creation in God's eyes. You put on the same clothes. You live in the same house. You do a lot of the same things. Hopefully you don't do all the same things, but you do some of the same things. But in God's mind, you are a completely different and new person. I want to try to illustrate this with the story of the unleavened bread. The Passover. I've never observed a Passover. Every year it's what we call Easter time, the Friday before the Easter Sunday. And it's controlled not by a specific date, but the cycles of the moon. And the very first one, God told Israel to kill a Passover lamb and to sprinkle the door and the post with its blood. But that's not all he said. They had to, before that was done, get the leaven out of the house. Because you're fixing to be delivered. And that command to get the leaven out of the house represented something. Their servitude in Egypt is synonymous to our being held in bondage by sin. And getting the leaven out because you're going to be delivered looks forward to the time when there's no servitude and the time when there's no sin held against me. And so we come in here and we eat the unleavened bread to remember the body of Christ because we don't have any more sin. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, it's the same principle, but used in a completely different context. If you remember, there was a young man there that was living with his stepmother. He was having sex with his stepmother. Now you say, oh, me. Inside this church building, that's the way it is. Oh, me. But you go outside this church building, and that doesn't shock anybody. Y'all, I carried a man to court one day. He wouldn't send his girl to school. She had a baby. That baby's daddy was also that baby's granddaddy. Right here in Henry County. It is awful outside these doors. And so when you take the bread, yes, you remember the body of Jesus. And you remember what happened to that body of Jesus. And you thank Jesus for going through all that stuff. But you also thank Him, I am remembering I don't have any more sin, Lord. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But our freedom from sin turns right around and makes us slaves to God. We think how bad it was for the slaves in the United States to have been purchased. Do you not realize that Jesus purchased you by His own blood? You are as much bound to Him because of His purchasing you as those slaves were in shackles. The only difference is God is love, and so now we are a slave to love, not to sin. Boy, that makes a difference. I got a bunch of stuff here I'm supposed to say to you, but I'm not going to say it. You're free from sin. As long as you walk in the light with Him, He will never, ever hold you accountable. Just keep trying, keep loving Him, and keep living it. Amen? This next one is difficult to explain, free hearts. Now, I'm not talking about free hearts like it was in the 1960s with the hippies. That's not what I got in mind. So let's see if I can set this up a little bit. The law brought a curse. That's what we've said. Jesus cursed the fig tree. It died. You're under the curse. You're going to die. So the law makes us aware of sin. That law is good, but that law comes and it kills you spiritually. You are dead even by that good law. And only Christ sets you free. It only comes from Him. Since we are free from sin in Him, therefore we are free from the curse of the sin, which is death. I'm going to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I'm going to use this passage out of context. I know I am. For he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's free man. Likewise also he that is called, being free, is Christ's servant. Now it's talking about here, no matter what condition you are in, whether you are a slave or whether you are free, that doesn't matter in Christ. But just because you're in Christ, if you're a slave, guess what? You got to stay a slave. Do you remember Paul's letter to Philemon? Take Onesimus back, Philemon. Onesimus going back to be a slave. But Onesimus is to be counted as a brother. So that's what it's really used for. What I want you to see is that it doesn't matter where you are, your status changes. It changes with God. It changes in the world when you become a Christian. The world is not going to like you because you're going to be doing good stuff. You're not going to be doing evil stuff. And the world can't stand that. So even though we're free, we are still slaves to God, slaves of heart. Now here comes the difficult part. We are slaves to love. Only the last blank now is what you fill in, okay? Only the last blank. Slaves of heart and slaves to love. That means that I have no choice. When somebody needs groceries like they did last night, I have no choice. I've got to do what I need to do to provide those groceries. In this heat, somebody needs air conditioning, I have no choice. It was a day about like today, back when my son was in high school. And he was having to play a baseball game. And he was wiped out when that game was over. But there was a team there from Martin. And they were going to have to play in 3 hours. And they were wiped out just sitting there. And I knew one of the boys on the team. And I said, why don't y'all come home with me? I took that whole team to my living room. Why? Because they were wiped out. That was nothing great, but it's something they needed. They needed to be refreshed. And we're slaves of the heart to love others and do for them what they need done. And we are slaves to do God's will. We don't have a choice. The difference is being a slave to God's will is no longer like it used to be. When God gave the law to Israel, He gave them 10 commandments. And then He expanded on that, and they expanded on that. There's 637 in the Old Testament, and then they added another 500 and something. Over 1,000 laws that the Jews were bound to keep. Well, in Hebrews chapter 8, and also in Hebrews chapter 10, this verse is there. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws in their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. Now it's not in stone. The law of God is no longer in stone. It's in your heart and in your mind. So that's why I said you've got to give your heart to God. If you're going to experience real freedom, it has to do with that. Chapter 10 says, this is a new way. It's a living way. It's a different way. Never before has man had this. It is in his flesh. Now you can take that two different ways. His flesh might be the flesh that was crucified for my sins. The new way is only through that door. Or it might be in his body, which is the church. It's the only place where we have all spiritual blessings given to us. We are now free to make judgments because it's on our hearts and minds. How many laws did God give us? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. And the second is like unto it, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And everything else, you've got just about to make judgments on. Yeah, there's some morality stuff in the New Testament. There's some other things about like worship and prayer and so on. But you're free to make judgments. You don't have a, quote, time of prayer given to you by God. The Jews at 9 o'clock had to pray. 12 o'clock had to pray. 3 o'clock had to pray. Had to pray again when they went to sleep. God lets you do that whenever you want, as often as you want. So there's a lot of gray area, and there's where the tough stuff comes. I'm going to use 1 Corinthians chapter 8. The setup for that passage is this. In Corinth, they were basically pagans. They worshiped gods, and one of their philosophers that talked about both Athens and Corinth said it's easier to see a god in Corinth than it is to see a man. That's how they were proliferated all around the city. So when they became a Christian, they came out of paganism. And when they came out of paganism, they had some lot of superstitions. You know, like the Ouija board and like the horoscope in the paper and all kinds of different things that we got to do this because this says, this looks like, whoa. And so when they offered meats to idols, the pagan says, let's sell it to get money. And so they took that good roasted meat. Y'all know what it smells like when you go out to Tom's and they're cooking those steaks on that grill. You know what it smells like. Go up to the olive pit, get out of your car, and he's cooking one of those steaks. That's the best steak in the nation, I think. You know what it smells like. Or just cook something on a grill at home. You know what it smells like. But I'm a Christian now. Can I eat that meat that's offered to an idol? Ooh, it may make the idols mad at me. Bad things may happen. So Paul addresses this in the 8th chapter. In verse 1 he says, you have knowledge. It's not general knowledge, but it's knowledge that those idols are nothing. They're a piece of wood. They're a few jewels. There may be some gold, but they are nothing. And if you love God, it's going to show how you react to the meat that's offered to idols. There's no other God. No other God but our God. In the Old Testament, God speaks about the idols. They don't breathe. They don't speak. They don't walk. They don't do anything. They're a piece of wood, just like that bench right there. That's all they are. In verses 5 and 7, he says, but some of you don't know this yet. So because I know it, and I might get puffed up at it, you mean you don't know this? Yeah, I'm telling you, you can eat this meat. Oh, I don't know. Might make the gods mad. So you can see how that faith thing there would cause a problem. But we believe in one God. It's just meat, y'all. It doesn't matter who cooks it. Doesn't matter how it's cooked. It's just meat. So Paul says in verses 10 through 11, consider those who are still learning. The King James calls it the weak brother. Consider those who are still learning, because they don't know that those pagan gods are not something else. And Paul says, I will not offend my brother's faith. I will not hurt that weak brother. And if it takes it, I'll not eat meat the rest of my life. And I get to make that decision. What decision? When I see I'm doing something that hurts you, I get to make the decision to stop. It may be okay for me to do it, but it's not okay for me to do it if it hurts you. Let me give you an illustration. There are lots of gray areas. I went to Trinidad, and down there it is a damnable sin for you to take a cigarette and puff on it. The church down there teaches you're going to hell for that. But they teach it's okay if you drink. Now, you see, there's differences. And give me another illustration. When I was in college, I went to the Cotton Club, I think, in Puryear, with a bunch of boys that wanted to go south, it was called, at Murray State, to get a beer. I went with them. So I go in there, and we sit around the table, and the waitress comes over, and she starts taking a beer request. She gets around to me, and I say, I want a Coke. Yeah, I want a Coke. She puts her hand on her hip, she turns around and says, hey, Mabel, see this guy in the white shirt? Out loud, there are 20 or 30 other people in there. Guy in the white shirt, he wants a Coke. Do we have any Cokes? And Mabel says, I think there are 2 at the end of the cooler if they hadn't been sold yet. So she goes over there, she finds one, she pulls it out. Hey, Mabel, I found the Coke. The guy in the white shirt right over there, he wants this Coke. Do we have an opener that'll open a Coke? Mabel says, well, I don't know, but I think maybe that beer opener will open that Coke. Now, I'll tell you, that's a funny story. I was embarrassed to death, okay? But I was in a place probably I shouldn't have been, all right? I acknowledge that to God. God, forgive me if that was a sin, but I didn't do anything. I was just there because I wanted to be with the buddies. I could have done something wrong. I'm not going to tell you it'll send you to hell for drinking a beer. The Bible does not say that. The Bible says it's a sin for you to get drunk. And we need to put that in the proper place and proper perspective. But let's just say a delivery man who is a Christian comes in there while I'm in there. That's not good for influence. Because he may not see my Coke, but he may see a table full of beer bottles. And now Charlie's drinking beer. And I wasn't. You see how our judgments get? And we need to be careful with how we judge other people, and we need to be careful how we treat other people in their faith. Because you don't know the whole story. You just don't know the other story. We need to grow beyond these judgments. One of the hardest things in my faith is, with whatever judgment I judge, that will I also be judged. So when I start looking at other people, I've got to find that cough drop. I need to be thinking about what I'm doing. So let's close this lesson down. Whatever you do, your faith must be based on, I love God, whatever it is. And if I love God, I'll be concerned for the faith of others, for their strength and their goodness. And I'm going to add something to that right there. In my concern for others, I will think the best of them instead of the worst. That needs to be in that lesson. In my faith, if I love God, I will always honor Him, no matter what it looks like to people outside. I will always honor Him. And if I love God, I'll not use the freedom that I have in Christ to destroy the temple of God, whether it's my body or whether it's the faith of somebody else. And finally, if I love God, I'll always strive to build the church up. Whatever I do, whatever decisions I make, it'll be for these purposes. I am so thankful for the freedoms we've got in this country. And I want you to pray with me for our leaders, for our country, that it may continue. Because I'm telling you right now, there is a movement to take the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, with all the Bill of Rights that you've got, and to do away with them, so you can be completely controlled. Lord, help us. Amen.